Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we're looking at Paul writing about how love fulfills God's requirements, something that even Jesus himself talked about. And we'll hit that a little bit. So this is going to come from Romans 13 verses 8 through 14. So starting in verse 8 says, "Owe nothing to anyone except for your obligation to love one another. If you love your neighbor, you will fulfill the requirements of God's law. For the commandments say, you must not commit adultery, you must not murder, you must not steal, you must not covet. These are, and other such commandments are summed up in this one commandment: love your neighbor as yourself." And it's interesting, right? Um, well, let me finish this. Love does no wrong to others, so love fulfills the requirements of God's love. If you look at these things, right? Loving. It's interesting. One of the things I used to teach on and preach on was how the reason for love, the commandments and things around love, was not just because the harm they do to you, but the harm they do to others. And you're like, well, what do you mean? Like, obviously, like, don't commit adultery. Why don't you commit adultery? Right? Because it hurts other people. Now, I don't I mean not only does it hurt yourself, true in the end, truly, it hurts other people. Obviously, murder hurts other people. Don't steal; it hurts other people. Don't covet, because in the end, coveting, it leads to things that hurt other people. And so it's interesting how a lot of our relationship with God, what I call the vertical, right, the up and down, is based on, right. And I've said this many times. If you want to be right with God, right, if you want to work on that vertical, right, I'm sorry, this isn't in my notes. This is just something that hit me while I was reading this. You got to work on the horizontal. I think the horizontal is your relationship with other people, especially other God's others children. And if you can work on that, if you can get that right, and this is what this is saying to me, anyways. You love other people and treat other people. You treat God's people, His children, the way He wants you to treat them. Then your relationship with Him is going to be good. And so that's this is how this is summed up. So I want you to think about that as you go, because so many people, though, and not to say prayer's not important, not to say a lot of things are important, but they'll be like, oh, I got to work on the vertical. I got to work on the vertical. If you want the vertical to be good, if you want your relationship between you and God to be good, make the horizontal good. Treat people well. All right, treat people lovingly, treat people kind. You can't be mean and hateful to people, especially God's people, and then expect your relationship with God to be good. I've seen that. I've seen people be like, oh, you they lift themselves up about their prayer life and all these things, and they try to appear holy, like they have this perfect relationship with God, but then they're a butt, right? And they treat people horribly, and they don't show love to people. And it's like, no, that I don't care what you say, your vertical's not good, right? Your relationship with God's not good, because I know it's not good because the way you treat people. And so it's the opposite, right? The way you treat people will show whether your relationship with God is good. And so I wanted to throw that in there just as we're going to. He says, this is all the most urgent, for you know how late it is. Time is running out. Wake up, for your salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is almost gone. The day of salvation will soon be here. So remove your dark deeds like dirty clothes, and put on the shining armor of right living. Because we belong to the day, we must live decent lives for all to see. Don't participate in the darkness of wild parties and drunkenness, or in sexual promiscuity and immoral living, or in quarreling and jealousy. Instead, clothe yourself with the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ, and don't let yourself think about ways to indulge your evil desire. And so, like I said, right at the beginning of this, these verses discuss how believers relate to each other, how we should relate to each other, how we should treat each other, right? If we truly love others, our action will reflect all the commandments in the law that concern our relationships with other people. And so, this goes back to, and I'll hit on this a little bit, but right, but the idea here is that if you look at Romans 13 verses 1 through 7, which is, a kind of be a sacrifice for the Lord, and sacrifice our bodies for the Lord, and then you look at 1 7, right, or 8 through 10, these two kind of hinge on each other, right? And Christians are to give to everyone what they owe them, and Christians always owe love to their neighbors. We always owe love to everyone, no matter what, even if they're mean, if they're hateful to us. Owe love to everyone, all right? And then he talks about, says, okay, owe nothing to anyone, right? Debts, right? The debts, the reason they're debts are they're not that they're sinful, but they should be avoided. And if encouraged to be promptly paid so that believers are free to serve and love. And so those are the things that, if you've ever loaned money to someone or had someone loan money to you, that can cause issues sometimes. And so I think that's part of the idea. I think that's part of the reason why that's thrown in the middle of this. And so he calls us to love one another, right? Believers, we are called to love one another, and we are called to love all that we encounter, right? We see that in Romans 12, we see that in Luke 10, all those type of things. And so, but this phrase especially emphasizes the love that each believer has for the other believer. And so this doesn't mean that we don't love those who aren't believers, but the emphasis in here is for the believers to truly love and show love for one another. And there's a reason for this, right? I mean, if we're trying to attract people to Christ and show people what Christ is like, and we can't get along, right? Well, then what's people on the outside going to say? It's like, man, if y'all can't even get along, y'all hate each other. Why would I want to be a part of that? And so I think that's part of the emphasis there. And when you go back and Jesus told them. I mean, we can see this in John when Jesus told them, said, they will know you by your love for one another." And so that Paul is emphasizing this. And so he goes on to say that, hey, you will fulfill the requirements of God's law. And this is teaching that, like I said, that goes very much along with Jesus in Matthew 22, right? The New Testament here often speaks of salvation as the final victory over sin and death, and that believers will experience when Jesus returns. And so he talks about the day of salvation. And the word here reflects two surfaces. The word day reflects two surfaces. First, the Old Testament repeatedly predicts the day of the Lord when God's plan kind of comes together and everything comes to fruition, right? And second is the tradition of moral instruction in the ancient world associated with light and daytime, the good and the darkness, right? um, I'm sorry, the good and evil, which were reflected by nighttime, or darkness as nighttime, and day um, as light, and day as good. And so we've always kind of seen that. And all the cultures of that time, Romans, Greeks, even the ancient Jews, all used that contrast, and we use that contrast today. I mean, even today, like day and light and daytime is associated with good, and darkness and night are associated with evil, right? I mean, if you're a Star Wars fan, right, you have the light side and the dark side, right? And so and so it's just something that's been used in cultures for a very long time. And so because believers belong to the day, they should be living out its values, avoiding the dark deeds that are typical of the nighttime. And so Paul's saying, kind of to sum us up, it's like, hey, if you love God, you're going to love your neighbor. That's how you want to fulfill the requirements of the law. Love your neighbor, love the people around you, show love to, especially to those who are Christians, and avoid living in sinful lifestyle. Because they still had. I mean, we can go back to Corinthians, right? And we saw the way some of them were living. If you understood Rome and it's the way it was in this day, it was a very sinful culture, a lot of sexual things, um, very immoral. And so he's saying, stay away from that stuff. Don't even think about it, right? Don't and stay away from it. And so that's the encouragement that we see there. So as we continue on, we're going to tomorrow look at the dangers of criticism. We'll get into that. So that is actually a little bit longer one, and it's a very important one. I mean, I think it's something that we need to pay attention to, especially in the church today, because we do live in a society that and I'm probably going ahead of myself, but we do live in a society that's where criticism and criticizing people and kind of being mean and hateful to people is kind of a common thing that's been encouraged. So we'll look at that next week. As always, I hope y'all are learning from these. I hope you're enjoying them. I highly encourage you to if you haven't, to subscribe to our channel, so that way we get these every day. We publish these every morning and send them out. But as always, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch these, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.